Hi, I'm here to talk today about surviving a childhood with a toxic mother. Boy, this is a tough one. But I have to do this for you, for each of you who either has had a toxic mother or has a friend with a toxic mother or knows someone that you've seen treat their children in a way that you would never do. Because there's a lot to understand about this, and it's taken me many, many years and a lot of research and a lot of trying to understand myself and others. I learned about, I knew my mother was different, but I didn't know why, and I was just a kid. You know, how do you know these things when you're a kid? I was an only child. My brother was born 18 months after me, but he died because my mother's blood wasn't compatible with my father's. They called it Rh negative. He only lived for 4 days, and my mother never forgave me for being born female. She was 6'1", my father was 5'6", 5 feet 6 inches, 6 feet 1 inch. And they wanted 6 tall sons. They'd only known each other for 28 days when they got married. It was after the war, and there was that sort of thing was going on all over the place. So that wasn't so terribly unusual, but the fact that their marriage was based on wanting tall sons was different. They didn't have the same faith. They didn't have the same background. They weren't raised the same way. My father was Roman Catholic. My mother was Lutheran. She was raised in a heavy Lutheran environment, but she didn't grasp it herself. But she had an uncle and a brother who were ministers. My father was raised Polish Catholic, of course. My mother was raised in Montana. My dad was raised in Connecticut. So there was a lot of difference, and the family completely disowned my father when he married my mother. So there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. I mean, I've met kids who had toxic mothers because they were, my mother was an alcoholic, but they were drug addicts or never married and had lots and lots of male friends coming over all the time, and they had fathers all the time, and pseudo-fathers I was thinking of. But there are just so many reasons you can have a toxic mother. For one thing, is a woman who never wants to have a child and finds herself pregnant and can't get an abortion. That happens too. Anyway, the research that I've studied, and I've looked at quite a lot over the years, and I've researched people, of course, in a casual way, and I found that it's very, very difficult to have a toxic mother. I recently learned that especially if you're an only child, because you can't talk to your siblings about what's going on. And that was my situation. I was an only child. They couldn't have any more children. She had had several abortions. And the more abortions she had, the more she drank. And the more she drank, the worse things became for me, because it was easy to blame me. It was easy to say, you should have been born a boy. And she felt like a failure. It took her 6 years before she had me. 6 years. She married at 21. My dad was 24. 2 young, relatively healthy kids. They should have had a baby right away, but that didn't happen. And she carried the boy 10 and a half months, which is unusual. Usually it's only 9 months. So he was extremely large, a difficult pregnancy, and he died. So no matter what the story, no matter what background, it's difficult for the child. Now, in recent years, very recent years, and I'm glad I lived long enough to see this or to notice this in myself, I've been able to forgive or to have empathy, let's put it that way, to have empathy for the child my mother was, her childhood. Her parents separated and they divorced, and she fell out of a door jamb jump seat. It used to be common to put jump seat screwed up into the door jamb, and the problem with screwing it up into the door jamb is they're only supposed to use them till they're a year old. She was 3 years old, and since she was 6'1" as an adult, she was probably pretty tall as a child, and she jumped and it broke, and she landed on her coccyx, the tailbone. It broke the tailbone, and she also had problems in her thoracic area, right between the shoulder blades and in her neck. So she was faced with several different pain areas as a result of this. She also froze her legs in walking to school because they didn't make stockings long enough for her, and they wore stockings in those days and walked through the snow. She was born in 1919. Dad was born in 1916. So things were different, and they went through the Depression, which was very hard. So there were circumstances that were difficult for her. But then again, there's the mother that I dealt with, and that was extremely hard for me. And that I can't use the word forgive. It was a horrid experience, and I go back and I feel a level of empathy, of course, for her as a child, but I feel, especially now, I feel like she should have recovered. And the reason I feel that is that I work for groups that recover, help people with drug and alcohol problems recover. My mother took a lot of medication for pain, and she took a lot of alcohol. She'd take a 12-ounce glass and fill it halfway full of alcohol, and the rest of the way with that sangria wine, and that was her breakfast. So it was difficult. Living with her was extremely difficult. She would ask people when we were doing all this moving with the military, well, now do the bushes around here have nice sharp switches on them? And she would buy me the paddles, the round paddles. It looks like a tennis paddle, except it has a rubber band on it, a ball at the end. And she'd say, hurry up and break it so I can use it on you. She broke lots of rulers and lots of yardsticks over me and lots of switches. I missed school because of bruising. I was a pain in the neck for her because I had rheumatic fever from the age of 5 to the age of 9. And it was hard for her because she was a registered nurse. She had never worked, but she did graduate from nurses training. And that's when she married my dad. But she had never worked as a nurse, but she was forced to nurse me. She was forced to put me in bathtubs full of ice water, which was pretty horrendous. And she was forced to take my temperature. She was forced to take me to the base so that they could, the U.S. Air Force base, so that they would take care of me, which they did. It was all there's no charge because Dad was in the military. And most of the time Dad was gone, and that annoyed her because she had to take me herself or hire somebody to take me. And that really annoyed her terribly, and it annoyed her that I was sick so much. And she just found that very, very hard to deal with. I don't ever remember her reading a story to me. I know she must have taught me how to embroider, but I don't remember that. I was only 3 when I started that. But she didn't like to go places with me. She didn't take me places. I don't remember ever going to a movie with my mother. I don't even remember going to any of the women's events that she went to. I just wasn't a part of that. We weren't buddies. We weren't friends. She wasn't my teacher, and mothers are supposed to be teachers for the rest of their lives. That's the whole point of being a mother, is you're the first, the primary, and always the teacher of the student. I do remember her once coming to school. I was in 2nd grade. We had just moved to an area when they gave me a test. And they came back to the school and said, we need to see this student and her parents. And of course, I was terrified. I was only 7 years old, and I'm sitting in the front seat of a classroom with no students. There were just 2 men in suits, and my teacher was a female, my dad and my mother, looking at me while I was sitting in the front row and thinking, what is happening here? I had no idea what was going on. And the man came up to me with the book that was the test book, and he opened it and pointed to one question, and he said, would you answer that question? So I read it, and I answered the question, and he said, why did you pick that answer? And I said, well, because my dad has the long metal piece that goes down in the car engine, and he checks the oil, and he lifts the hood and he puts it in and he checks the oil, and he does that a lot when we're driving because he wants to make sure there's enough oil in the car. And they left. I didn't say anything to me and didn't say anything to the teacher. I didn't know what was going on. And we moved a couple of times, and finally a letter caught up with us and said that from now on your child will be in gifted classes, something I believe they call it advanced placement now. But I was put into gifted classes from then on through high school because I scored what they considered 100%, because they decided that question, the answer to that question that I gave was more logical than the one they had chosen. Wow, it was a heavy thing for a kid, especially an odd kid. I was an odd child because I was much taller. I was named Zaleski, which is a strange name. It was Polish right after World War II when so many Poles had been killed. I was a gifted kid, and I was outspoken. I never met a stranger. I always moved so much, I never met a stranger. But I didn't have any friends. I didn't have anybody who was my buddy because I was always moving. So it was an odd thing for me and very difficult. Like I said, I missed school occasionally because of bruising that showed. Usually she would hit me in places that my clothes would cover. She made all my clothes. It was part of the economy of being a military family. She made all my skirts, and they were to the top of my bobby socks. So it was always very embarrassing because everybody else wore skirts that were below their knees, but not that much below their knees. And when you're a kid, those things are really important. Golly, they're so important. An inch can make a difference in a skirt length. I kept growing, and I kept hoping I'd grow out of the clothes and grow up and be able to wear them. But those are the dreams of a kid. And I can admit to you, I used to dream, I wish I'd wake up a boy and my parents would be appreciative of me. But it wasn't that my father wasn't. My father did appreciate me, but he was never home. He was gone at least half of the time. I didn't see him. He was on military missions, one time for a year, but most of the time for 3 months. He'd be 3 months gone, home a week, 3 months gone, home a week. So there wasn't a lot of interaction between us. He wrote me a letter once, I remember so clearly, that he told me how much he really cared about me. And I think he did it because he knew that things were not good between Mother and I, but he and Mom had such a poor relationship anyway. I mean, Dad, there was no way in hell he was going to divorce because he was Catholic. And he was a very, very staunch Catholic. Even though he started going to the Lutheran church after my brother died, he still was, in his heart and soul, he was a Catholic. And Catholics don't divorce. My mother was from a family of a divorce, and she went through the shame of that. There's no way she was going to divorce. So they stuck it out, and when they were home, they were screaming at each other. He never laid a hand on her, but they were screaming at each other, and he was clearly unhappy. He was clearly, it was obvious. And her brother, Stanley, who was about 15 years older than me, was from his father's second marriage. That was my mother's father, remarried after the divorce, an old spinster, and she was the love of my life. Oh gosh, I was crazy about her. She was so sweet, and I just adored her. I saw her so few times, but she even came to see me after her husband died, after my grandfather died. She was just so good to me. She knew that my mother was abnormal in the way she treated me. I didn't have any nurturing. And that's what I want you to know about. I want everybody who's listening to this video to recognize if you're not nurtured, you're going to have a weak ego. And the most obvious example of that, of course, is our current administration in the United States. Most of the people who are acquiescing, bowing, and all those things to President Trump are doing so because they could see that he wasn't nurtured and he wasn't made to feel important. And now he's trying everything he can think of to feel like he has value. And it's really sad. It's really sad because sustainability is when something is maintained. And sustainability in a child typically means they're taught to respect the earth. They're taught to respect each other in an equal way, equality for all. And the last thing they're taught is emotional well-being. They get that emotional well-being from being treated with a nurturing way by their parents. There are so many studies that show that a person who has not been nurtured will have, at their very least, mental but emotional disorders. That's just the way it is. They did some real comprehensive studies many years ago about the kids that were orphaned during the Second World War. I remember that so clearly because I was young when I read that. And because they weren't held, they weren't touched, they didn't have skin-to-skin contact with, even the faces, their hands, nothing was nurturing them, loving them, touching them, making them feel important. That at some point they started putting the children in the bags that are on the chests of the nurses so that the children the orphans would at least feel the heartbeat and the breathing of someone to make them feel more like they had value, like they were to be loved. But the ones who don't have that, their egos are weak. And it's really a difficult problem. And to get over that requires a lot of work. It can be done, but it requires a lot of work because you have to overcome reaching for a drink or reaching for a drug or becoming an overeater or a gambler or taking medications that are actually prescribed to you, but overtaking them, having trouble sleeping, having trouble with the job, having trouble connecting with people in your life. There are just so many issues that come up for people who haven't had nurturing. And it's a very sad thing because we can so easily be normal in an unbiased sense, happy and loved by our family and have wonderful Thanksgivings and Christmas and New Year's and all those kinds of things, but not with a mom who says, God made all mothers love their children, but they don't have to like them. She used to say that to me like it was a mantra. I mean, she'd say it over and over again, and it just broke my heart because the older I got, the more I realized she was just flat saying she didn't like me. And that was so painful. My firstborn, she objected. She took my firstborn. I was raped, and she took my firstborn, and she said if it had been a girl, we'd given her away. That was kind of a confirmation. But the most vivid confirmation is when my daughter was about 8 or 10 years old, and we went to visit my mother with my husband. And at the time, she was so cruel to Diana. Diana was a sweet little girl who, at 4.5 months, had a heart attack. She was only 17 pounds on her first birthday. She was so quiet because she had a heart condition. And she was just such a loving child and always good in school. I mean, she behaved herself well. She wasn't a star student or anything. She was recovering she is a star now. She has her doctorate. She's the president of the university, but they didn't think she'd see her first birthday, and she did, and she lived. And it was nurturing that did it. Then that's the difference. Had I ignored her, there's a strong possibility she wouldn't have lived, because the children don't have the will to live when they're not nurtured. So please, if you've run into the same thing, if you've experienced not having the love from a parent, and especially if you're single, an only child has no aunts or uncles or cousins or anybody else to ask if they don't live near the family, which was my problem. I didn't have, and there couldn't be friends because we never lived anywhere long enough. We actually moved 22 times in 22 months between second and third grade. So it was very, very difficult to establish friendships and to be able to ask somebody questions about that. And I certainly wouldn't go to any of the school people. I mean, nowadays, I believe that schools let you know that if your parents are abusing you, you're supposed to come to school authorities and talk to them about it. But there was nothing like that when I was a child. And there was no internet. I don't remember ever being in a library where I could have looked up something and found some information on a psychological level and how that would be for someone who had a toxic mother. So I had no references, no way of confirming that it wasn't me, it wasn't my fault. I mean, that was the hardest part, because usually a child, when they're in that kind of a situation, they believe it's their fault and that they're to blame, and the reason the mother doesn't love them is because they're unlovable. And these are just really, really tough things to deal with as a child. So if you're in that situation, or if you know someone who's in that situation, please share this with them, especially if they're a young person and they're afraid to ask anybody, and you suspect that could happen, because it's really important to know that it's not your fault. It's really, really important to know it's not your fault, because when you think it's your fault, you think you're not worth anything, and you don't do well in school. And of course I did really, really well in school, because my father let me know under no circumstances. I mean, he made it very, very important. The best day to die is the day you don't learn something. He always pushed me to learn. And I always did, because I respected my father. I just didn't have enough time with him. It just wasn't possible. And when I did, my mother used to keep a list of everything I'd done wrong when he was gone. And like I said, he was often gone for 3 months, and sometimes he was gone for a year. And she had a list that he was to beat me for every one of the things that I had done wrong when he was gone. And he would. I have to believe that he did it because he was Catholic and he felt like he had to do what his wife asked. Even though he wasn't a Mr. Mouse by any chance. He was a very, very, very bright man who succeeded in making his way up into being an officer during the war. And it was because he was so bright, and he did know how to push himself. And he taught me the same thing. That's where the Dr. Universe comes from. I don't know if you've looked at that, but the reason I'm called that is it was an award for having a PhD and volunteering a lot of your time. So the idea was you put yourself in a position to make more money, but you volunteered. Well, I volunteered because I knew what it was like to have a crappy childhood, and I knew what it was like to need to be nurtured, and I knew what it was like to not have anybody to talk to. So I would volunteer. I volunteered in children's nurseries and day camps, swimming pools, all kinds of different nonprofit groups. I started my own nonprofit group, Summerland Monastery. You can read about some of the things that we did as members of that group over the last 34 years. And that's why I went to business college. My father really pressured me to go to business college, but I did it because I wanted to know about volunteering. I think volunteers save thousands of people every year, in the same way that this video may be beneficial to people. because of letting them know, hey, you're okay. You're okay. It wasn't about you. It was about others. And that's what this video is about. It was not about you. It was about her. And don't ever forget that. If you have any questions or comments, just talk to me down below. I'd be happy to answer you. I'm very much in favor of helping in any way I can. Thank you so much.